Evening and welcome to Game Master Soapbox. I'm Jonathan Albin, and today we're going to be going over what players really need to know in order to participate in role-playing games. As a game master with 50 years of experience, I've been doing this for a while, and it has been almost expected that the players know what they're getting into when they start playing. But if you have never played a role-playing game before, you probably don't have a clue about what you really need to bring with you to the table. And so we're going to be talking about the topics that a game master should be able to impart to the players, what the players will need to bring with them, and what kind of basic information you'll need to be able to get the best and the most excitement out of your game's experience. Before we get started, make sure you go down below and click all the buttons to let the algorithm know that you're part of our audience, and let's get underway.
Absorbing damage is the name of the game. From the claws of monsters or the heat from a ball of flame, or strength in numbers is a roll of the dice.
Alrighty, so when we are talking about role-playing games, of course, we're speaking of the entire panoply, whether you are talking about the classic Dungeons and Dragons or you're going to the far field of Daggerheart or the other games mechanisms that are out there. And so these basics will apply to any role-playing game into which you're going to dive. We're going to be focusing perhaps on Dungeons and Dragons in particular, but generally these same parameters will be used in any role-playing mechanism that you get involved with. Alrighty, so the first thing we have to talk about are what your options are. If you are a game player, a role-play gamer, and you are sitting at the table, it's often kind of confusing to know what you need to know. And so a game master should go through with each of you what is expected. Now, every game master utilizes a different mechanism, uses different styles and means of gaining the information they need to progress the game. And so it's important that the game master provides you with information on movement, on investigation, on utilization of resources, the list of items that you might have as your possessions, and so on. And until the players have a really strong feeling about this, it's important that the game master constantly opens up the conversation and expresses their perception of things so that the players get a feel for it. In other words, if you are a very visual person and your game master tends to be very abrupt and short in his narration, it might be important for you to remember to ask more questions. And we'll go into this a little bit later, perhaps, but the real point here is that you need to be familiar with what you can and can't do in the game. Sometimes this is pure physics, like how fast somebody runs or what is considered to be a proper amount of distance moved in a phase of the game or whatever, and it may come from the game mechanics, but it's really important that the players have a strong sense of where they are in the story and what they can and can't actually accomplish during their session. This also lends itself to the idea of player permissions, and I utilize this term to refer to propriety of dice rolls, perhaps a awareness of what they should be able to do, and really this has to do with the developing of the dialogue. We've talked in session 0 conversations about building up a stockpile of what it is or isn't expected or is or isn't permitted. But it's important that the players realize when they should be asking additional questions, when they have the right to gain additional information, and how the game master's interaction with them can happen session over session and action over action. Perhaps your game master requires you to ask for movement. Perhaps you have to define how far you are moving and such like. And this concept of player permissions really derives from what the game master requires and what the players have permission to ask more about. In other words, if you're not aware what you can't ask, you're not sure what your possibilities are. And so the permissions kind of go hand in hand with your options to make sure that you have the ability to explore the environment to your satisfaction, and therefore to be able to make additional decisions about the game. This, of course, lends itself to the idea of a vocabulary. There is certainly a glossary of general terms that are used, such as your turn, or what is a phase, what is a segment, and all kinds of minor terminologies. But developing a glossary might be something handy to do for your games group so that your players have a ready checklist of what they might want to ask questions about. By having a uniform vocabulary, a games group can cross a lot of information quickly rather than getting hung up on individual terms or actions. And this isn't something that happens instantaneously, but generally occurs week over week as the players get familiar with each other and what kinds of limitations and accesses they will have in the game. Of course, this lends itself to the very frames of reference. If you are speaking of a scene, how far can they travel in a given amount of time? How quickly do opponents approach them? Is there a methodology for representing this in-game? Many of the games that are out there do have rules and descriptions of these things, but sometimes it's important to get from your game master what they are utilizing for these. So players don't have a very good frame of reference when they're first starting because they don't know what to expect from their story and their storyteller. And so it's important to develop these as a game master so that your players have this. I have found it handy from time to time to provide the players with a short glossary list if I'm utilizing terms that are not familiar to them, if they're coming from a board games environment where they are very literal in terms of their space and their location. When you are moving into a theater of the mind operation that's much more diaphanous, you have to make sure that there are terms that can be placed on items, and more important, that those frames of reference can be maintained session after session so the players become familiar with them as well. When you're talking about traveling in an adventure game, one of the most difficult problems is determining left, right, north, south, east, west, especially if you're operating in a storytelling framework from the player's reference. So when you're describing things to them, give them a reference to their current positioning, turning left, turning right, forward of them, behind them, and learn to speak in that kind of a vocabulary so that it's easier for the players to see the action and imagine where they are. Navigation awareness doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be completely apprised of all of the environments around them, but they should have a strong feel about what is their, what is available to them. Is there someplace for them to move toward? Is there a place they can run back to? And by giving them navigational awareness in game, then you can call for actions from the players in an easier way. If you are a player and you're having difficulty with this, realize that generally speaking, you can ask questions at any time during a session to verify this information if you need to. And by becoming navigationally aware, knowing how far back the horses are and how close the fireplace and the campfire is to your current position. You have an idea of what you can accomplish within the frameworks of time that the game master allows. So it's important that game master provides the information and that the players track this information so they can be better informed when it comes to making decisions about what they're doing in game. Of course, this lends itself to the very idea of the attention to detail. Listen to what the game master says in reference to other people. Make sure you know where your positioning is compared to where they are. And by keeping a keen attention to detail, you can notice nuances in the storyteller's delivery that can give you additional information, even though they may not intend to. This idea of keeping aware of what's going on in the scene will make your decisions make more sense in terms of what you want to do within the scene. And it also reduces the amount of doublespeak where the game master has to repeat himself over and again. So it's important to develop a stronger attention to detail perhaps than you might have in other games, but also listen for verbal cues that go on during the session that give you an idea of how important things are, how far away they are, and what the possibilities might be. Now, it's important to also realize that the game master has an obligation to constantly update the situation to players so they can be aware. Maybe not in every action phase, but in every situation, the game master should apprise the players of updates in the scene that can affect them. So whether a weapon's been dislodged, or whether the villain has gotten closer, or whether there's a possibility of someone operating in stealth. All of these situational recaps really need to be brought to the front by the game master in each scene, generally at least once per turn. It's also important if you're running a system such as Nikos RPG that uses settings and stages, you need to make sure they're aware of the stage of the situation and what triggers might be applicable either in this turn or in upcoming turns, so that they know how to properly interact with the scene itself. All right, now every game master, of course, is going to have their own style, and in the case of a adventure that is set in the theater of the mind, it's really important that the game master develop not only his style of presentation, but utilize similar phraseology in recurring scenes so that the players can begin to see what's going on within the game and relate it to what's going on in reference to the way the game master tells stories. For example, in the case of a theater of the mind environment, if the game master has been giving you regular updates and all of a sudden misses one, is that perhaps a tell on their part? Are they moving things around within the scene that are not available for you, or are you merely misinterpreting what's going on? So it's important to remember that the game master's style of play is going to influence this greatly. If you have a game master, for example, that is very much a miniatures aficionado, he'll keep track of where you are on the battlefield, but he'll also keep track of where the villains are, how many actions they've already taken this round, and such like. And by following what the game master is presenting within his style and within his motif, you can pick up clues and information that will make your game more dynamic, because you'll be playing into the style of the storyteller as well. When you're talking about role-playing games, there are a lot of times that the assets that you have at hand need to be monitored and maintained. For example, I'm sitting here in a dark room, so to speak. Do I have a light source? How long will my light source last? What kind of resource management do we have to track to keep tabs on how many arrows we have remaining? And all of these various asset management mechanisms really depend on the storyteller's type. If it goes back to his style being fast and loose, he's not going to be drawing attention to this. But if you, on the other hand, want to take advantage of a game master's benevolence, so to speak, you can role play that in also by tracking for yourself the resources that you have at hand and what you may be able to bring to the table in the next round. This kind of asset management isn't always a burden, but it can be problematic for game masters who are really detail oriented. So players should be aware of what their game master's style is in order to know how deeply they'll have to track their own resources. Finally, it comes down to basic note taking. If you are a player in a game that is an ongoing campaign, odds are fairly great that the players are expected to keep notes on what's going on in the scene, what they know, what they are aware of, and utilizing a written notebook source will really aid you in being a better role player because you'll be able to keep track of what's going on in the game. Whether this means tracking the names of the NPCs or whether it has to do with the tracking of certain creatures or monsters, it's important for the players to be able to remember where they are moment by moment, let alone session after session. And so developing basic note-taking skills will really stand you in good stead, so to speak, with your storyteller when it comes to keeping track of what's going on in the adventure. All right, so as we come to the final portion of this, one of the things we haven't really talked about is the fact that players need to bring their own expectations to the game as well. If you have something that you're wanting to accomplish or something you're trying to achieve within the game, keep focused on that even as you're taking notes, even as you're interacting with the villains and the creatures, because it's really what the players bring to the game that provides it back to them tenfold. If you are a strident note taker, you're going to be better placed for helping your game master to keep the story straight, and your intention will be much better served when it's expressed to your game master. So when we close out, let me ask you this question. If you're a player in a game, what are your expectations? What do you want to see from your game master? If you are likewise a game master, what other things would you include in the list of player resources and player availability and player tools that you'd like to see brought to the table? I'm Jonathan Albin. This has been Nyko's RPG. Thank you for being here, and go play. Go play now.